I'm okay. It was much more emotional than I thought, and I found it very hard to speak outside the court.
British pop singer Sir Cliff Richard has won a privacy case against the BBC.
He was the face of British pop, a legend who defined a generation. But fame has a darker side. And one day, Cliff Richard simply vanished. Now, after years of rumors and silence, the real story is finally breaking through the surface. Was it love, betrayal, or something darker that forced him out of the spotlight? The boy from India. Cliff Richards wasn't always called by that name. In fact, once upon a time, he was a shy little boy whose name was Harry Roger Webb. And believe it or not, he wasn't even born in England, but a place called Lucknow in India. His dad worked for the Indian Railways, and the family lived a pretty modest life in colonial India. But when India gained independence in 1947, the Webbs packed up their entire world and left. Harry was just 6 years old at the time when they boarded a ship to England, and when they arrived, they didn't do so in style. The family ended up in Cheshunt, Hertfordshire, in a cramped house with no indoor bathroom and barely any heat. Winters were brutal, and Harry often remembered how the family would huddle in one room, trying to stay warm while the rest of the house felt like the inside of a freezer. But what they lacked in comfort, they made up for in love and music. Harry was a quiet boy, but music lit him up and gave him a confidence that suppressed the shyness. He joined the choir at school, and at home, he would hum along to anything on the radio. Then, one day, his dad changed his life by buying a guitar. Harry started teaching himself chords, practicing endlessly in his bedroom, and pretending that the hairbrush was a microphone. It wasn't long after Harry got his own guitar that he discovered Elvis Presley. Like so many teenagers in the 50s, Harry became obsessed with Elvis. He loved everything about the king of rock and roll, so much that he wanted to be like him, but on a grander scale. So he made a decision. If he was going to chase music seriously, he needed a name that sounded like a star. Becoming Cliff Richard. By the time Harry Roger Webb decided he was going to become a singer, he already knew that Harry Webb didn't sound like a rock star. It sounded like a name you'd see on a library card, not on a concert poster. So, in his quest for a new identity, he drew inspiration from American rockers and rebranded himself as Cliff Richard. Cliff was meant to sound strong and edgy, like Cliff Face. Richard came from Little Richard, who was one of his idols. And after he rebranded himself, he didn't start off his career alone. He joined up with a group of guys called the Drifters, later renamed the Shadows, after a little legal trouble with the American Drifters. Cliff was the frontman, and together, they became a tight unit of musicians who were hungry for success. Then in 1958, something huge happened. Cliff and his band released a single called Move It. It was supposed to be the B-side to another song, but when radio DJ Jack Good heard it, he flipped it. Move It was fresh and had a gritty sound that didn't sound like anything else coming out of Britain at the time. In fact, many music historians still say it was the first real British rock and roll song. When it hit the charts, people lost their minds at how dangerously good Cliff Richard was. At just 17, Cliff had the voice, the look, and the coolness that teenage Britain had been waiting for. He had slicked back hair, a wonderfully tantalizing smirk, and the leather jacket. Plus, he could work a stage like someone twice his age. Girls screamed when he performed, and boys copied his style. And suddenly, he was being called the British Elvis. But to be clear, Cliff wasn't copying Elvis like many assumed. While Elvis was all hips and rebellion, Cliff brought a cleaner charm, especially once he leaned into his Christian faith later on. He had just enough edge to keep the teens hooked, but enough polish to get mums and dads on board too. The late 50s and early 60s were a whirlwind. Cliff was everywhere, and he scored hit after hit like Living Doll, Please Don't Tease, and The Young Ones, which were not only popular, but breaking records. He didn't stop at music either. Cliff had movie star looks, so naturally, the film world came calling. Film stardom and global fame. By the early 1960s, Cliff was no longer a rising star, but the star. So when the silver screen and Hollywood-style fame came calling, he did not hesitate to answer. And just like everything else he touched in those early years, Cliff nailed it. His first major film, The Young Ones, 1961, was a full-blown musical which became a massive hit. It was fun, upbeat, and packed with songs people couldn't stop singing. Cliff played the charming, music-loving boy next door. Basically, he played himself, and audiences loved every minute of it. The movie was so successful, it actually broke British box office records at the time, and just like that, Cliff wasn't just a singer anymore, but a full-fledged film star. After the success of his first major movie, he starred in Summer Holiday in 1963. And that one really sealed the deal. The plot was simply a bunch of young Brits taking a double-decker bus across Europe. That's it. But again, the magic was in the energy, the music, and, of course, Cliff himself. The title song became one of his most iconic hits because of how catchy and unforgettable it was. These movies gave fans a chance to see another side of Cliff. He was funny, he could act, and he could dance. Well, sort of. More importantly, he felt relatable. He wasn't trying to be a Hollywood tough guy. He was just Cliff, the clean-cut charmer with a killer smile and a heart of gold. But what made these films even better was the timing. At the time, Britain was changing. The youth were taking over, and they wanted something different from their parents' old-school entertainment. Cliff's movies brought color, music, and youth culture to the screen in a way that felt fresh and exciting. He also managed to turn his acting into extensions of his music career. The soundtracks were huge in such a way that every movie seemed like a bonus album. Songs like Bachelor Boy, The Next Time, Dancing Shoes became chart hits in their own right, and his fame went global. Cliff began touring outside the UK, performing in Europe, Asia, Australia, and South Africa. Just like that, he stopped being a local hero and was flying the flag for British pop across the world. At one point, it felt like there wasn't a country where people didn't know his name. His boyish charm and catchy songs made him the perfect ambassador for the new British sound, just before the Beatles would take that torch and run with it. Finding God. By the late 1960s, Cliff Richard had the hit records, blockbuster films, and millions of adoring fans. From the outside, he looked like the man who had everything. But deep down inside, his life didn't feel right. The fame and endless performances all started to feel hollow. Cliff later admitted that, despite all his success, he sometimes felt empty. There were times when he'd look around at the flashing lights and the cheering crowds and wonder, is this it? Is this all there is? The thing is, Cliff had grown up in a Christian household, but like many young people, faith wasn't exactly a priority during his rise to fame. Music came first, success came second, and everything else got squeezed into the tiny spaces in between. But in 1964, something changed. While on tour, Cliff met a group of born-again Christians who spoke about God in a way he hadn't heard before. It wasn't boring or full of rules like he'd known all his life. There was something different about the gospel they shared, and so something clicked. Cliff started asking questions, reading the Bible, and attending small Christian gatherings in secret because he didn't want the press turning it into a circus. This was personal, and he didn't want it to become one of the many headlines in the media. It was about healing something inside of him that even fame couldn't touch. In 1965, Cliff gave his life to Christ. It was a real, deep spiritual awakening that changed everything for him. He didn't shout it from the rooftops at first, but his friends and fans started noticing the difference. His lyrics became more thoughtful. He turned down roles and gigs that didn't sit right with his new values. He even considered leaving showbiz entirely to work full-time in Christian ministry. But after some soul-searching and advice from valuable friends, he found a middle path. Cliff decided he didn't have to give up music to follow his faith. He just had to be more intentional about what he put out into the world. He could still sing, tour, and entertain, but now with a clear purpose behind it. In the years that followed, Cliff began releasing gospel songs alongside his pop hits. He wasn't afraid to talk about God in interviews, even when it wasn't trendy. Of course, this was received with mixed reactions by his fans, but Cliff didn't really care what anyone said about his newfound belief. He wasn't doing it for applause anymore, but for peace. His faith became the anchor that helped him through every storm that would come later in his life. Whenever things got dark, Cliff leaned into prayer. And while many artists burned out or lost their way, Cliff found a light that never went out. Reinvention in the 70s and 80s. By the start of the 70s, Cliff had been in the spotlight for over 10 years. He had enjoyed massive success in the late 50s and throughout the 60s, with hit records, sold-out tours, and even film roles. But music was changing quickly, and the world of pop had moved on. Rock was getting heavier, and punk was rising. What used to work for Cliff no longer had the same impact. He was still loved, but not as popular as before. So if he wanted to stay relevant, he had to adapt. At this point, most artists from his era had either stepped back or faded out. But Cliff didn't give up, and he didn't want to rely on past glory. Plus, he still loved music and believed he had more to offer. So he decided to make some much-needed changes. In 1976, he released a single that caught everyone by surprise, titled Devil Woman. It was darker and more modern than anything he had done before. The song had a mysterious edge and a catchy chorus. It sounded like an artist who had found a new voice, so the gamble paid off. The song became a top 10 hit in the US, his first major success there. It also performed well in the UK, and just like that, Cliff was back in the conversation. From that point on, Cliff began building a new chapter in his career. He focused on creating music that appealed to adult pop audiences. His songs became more thoughtful, emotional, and polished. Tracks like Miss You Nights and My Kinda Life showed a different side of him that was less teen idol and more grown-up artist. When he released We Don't Talk Anymore in 1979, it became a breakthrough. It was the perfect song for the time, and it shot to #1 in the UK, becoming one of the biggest hits of his career. It also performed well across Europe, and even reached the top 10 in several other countries. Cliff had proven that he could evolve and still compete with the best. Encouraged by the success, Cliff entered the 80s with confidence. He continued releasing songs that fit with the times, but still felt like him. Dreamin', A Little in Love, and Carrie were just a few of the singles that kept him on the charts and ensured he continued to thrive. One of his most memorable tracks from this era was Wired for Sound in 1981. The song was upbeat and catchy, and its music video, which showed Cliff roller skating through town in headphones, became an instant classic. It was lighthearted, fun, and made him seem fresh to younger audiences without losing his loyal fans. Another reason Cliff stayed relevant was his strong presence on TV. He appeared in music specials, holiday programs, and charity events. He made sure that his connection to the public never slipped. Cliff also worked just as hard as he did on stage. He kept recording, stayed open to new sounds, and listened to younger songwriters and producers. He didn't chase every trend, but he also didn't cling to the past. That balance helped him stay grounded while still moving forward. In 1986, he surprised everyone by teaming up with the cast of the comedy show The Young Ones to re-record Living Doll for comic relief. The mix of humor and nostalgia was a huge success, and it hit #1 in the UK, and showed that Cliff wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. He closed the decade with another major hit titled Mistletoe and Wine in 1988. It became the Christmas #1, and it reminded everyone that Cliff still had the magic touch. What made him different from the rest was his ability to grow older in the public eye without losing his identity. He didn't try to be something he wasn't, like most people. He didn't change his persona, but only learned to be better at being himself. And by the end of the 80s, Cliff had done what very few pop stars manage. He stayed popular through 3 very different decades. Cliff the Knighted Gentleman. By the 90s, Cliff Richard had already achieved more than most artists could dream of. He'd survived every major change in the music industry, stayed relevant for over 3 decades, and built a legacy that spanned continents. But in 1995, something happened that placed him in a league of his own. He became Sir Cliff Richard. Cliff was officially knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his contributions to music and charity. It was a historic moment for him and the entire British music scene. Cliff wasn't just the first pop star to receive a knighthood, he was also the first rock and roll artist to be honored in that way. And Cliff never let his new title go to his head. He stayed as humble as ever, and would often joke about how strange it felt to hear people call him Sir. He still signed autographs and waved at fans outside venues, so nothing of import really changed. Because behind the polished suits and the royal recognition, Cliff was still the same boy who once sang into a hairbrush in his bedroom. The same artist who had ridden the highs and weathered the lows of a very public life. But even with a title to his name, the years ahead would prove that not even a knight is safe from the darker side of fame. Media scrutiny and private life speculations. From the outside, Cliff Richard's life looked polished and unshakable. He had fame, faith, fortune, and a reputation for being one of the cleanest figures in pop history. But one aspect of his life kept drawing curiosity, and at times, cruel speculation. And that is the fact that he never got married. The entertainment world is filled with romantic entanglements, so when someone as famous as Cliff remained a bachelor, it kind of stood out. And while that may seem like a personal choice, it became public property. Journalists, tabloids, and talk shows couldn't let it go. Why hasn't he settled down? Who is he, really? The truth is, Cliff had loved before. In 1961, he wrote a heartfelt 3-page letter to his first serious girlfriend, Australian dancer Delia Wicks. The two had been together for 18 months when Cliff decided to walk away. Not because he stopped caring, but because he couldn't balance his exploding career with a lasting relationship. Being a pop singer, I have to give up one priceless thing: the right to any lasting relationship with any special girl, he wrote. I couldn't give up my career. Delia, heartbroken, never married. After she passed away in 2010, her brother revealed how devastated she had been by Cliff's decision. But even Cliff himself later said the choice haunted him. It was one of the prices he had to pay for fame, and it was steep. But over the years, there were other women. In the early 60s, Cliff had a brief romance with actress Una Stubbs, and later dancer Jackie Irving, whom he described as utterly beautiful. For a while, they were inseparable. Cliff also admitted to being seduced by Carol Costa, the estranged wife of Jet Harris from The Shadows. In the 80s, Cliff fell for Sue Barker, the British tennis star. Their romance played out in the public eye, and there were photos of them holding hands at Wimbledon and Cliff flying to Denmark just to watch her play. At one point, he even considered proposing. I seriously contemplated asking her to marry me, he said years later, but I realized I didn't love her quite enough to commit the rest of my life. Finally, there was Olivia Newton-John, the woman Cliff once said he had been in love with during the early 70s. But by the time he gathered the courage to say anything, she was already engaged, and it unfortunately became another missed moment. Despite the affection and the companionship, Cliff never found the relationship that pulled him away from his career and his calling. In interviews, he explained simply that marriage is a big commitment, and being an artist consumes a great deal of time. Yet the world didn't see it that way. The longer Cliff remained single, the louder the rumors grew. Was he gay? Was he hiding something? Was there more to the man behind the microphone? Cliff addressed the whispers head-on whenever he was confronted with them. "It's untrue," he said in the late 70s. "People are very unfair with their judgments. I've had girlfriends, but people seem to think that if a bloke doesn't sleep around, he must be gay." He also said that marriage wasn't something he would enter just to satisfy public curiosity. In a 1986 interview, Cliff admitted the speculation had been very painful. When he was asked in 1992 if he had ever questioned his sexuality, he responded simply, "No." He made it clear that while people were entitled to their opinions, they didn't get to define his truth. "Even if I got married tomorrow, there would still be people who believed what they wanted to believe." And though he lived alone at times, Cliff was never truly by himself. He spent many years sharing his home with his close friend and manager, Bill Latham, and Latham's mother. Later, Bill's girlfriend, Jill, moved in too. Cliff called them his second family, and according to Latham, Cliff's freedom from family obligations allowed him to devote his life wholeheartedly to his career, faith, and his love of tennis. To Cliff, privacy was his protection. He felt he didn't owe the world every detail of his heart, but that didn't stop the press from digging and twisting the narrative. The media's obsession with his personal life became a constant hum in the background of his career. Sure, it was frustrating, but very manageable. Until one day, it went too far. Because in 2014, the media would cross a line that would change his life forever. The BBC raid and police investigation. On August 14, 2014, while Cliff was away in Portugal, police officers from South Yorkshire raided his home in Berkshire. It was part of an investigation into an alleged historical assault from the 80s, which was an accusation Cliff strongly denied from the very beginning. But the part that stunned the public was the fact that the BBC was there during the raid, not after it. Somehow, the broadcaster had been tipped off. A helicopter hovered above Cliff's property, capturing dramatic footage of officers entering the home. The video went viral almost instantly, and Cliff Richard's name was now tied to a story he had no chance to explain before it went public. The first problem with the whole endeavor was that he hadn't even been arrested, let alone charged. Cliff found out his home had been searched by watching it on the news, just like everyone else. It was a nightmare, and in the days that followed, Cliff was devastated. His name was dragged through the mud based on an accusation. He never received a trial, nor was there evidence shown. All everyone based their judgment on were headlines. The press had a field day, and even though many people came to his defense, the damage had already been done. For nearly 2 years, Cliff lived under a dark cloud of suspicion. He cooperated with the police, gave interviews, and spoke openly about how the experience affected him. But all the while, the investigation hung over him like a weight he couldn't shake off. Then, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service finally announced that there was no evidence to support charges. The case was dropped, and Cliff was completely cleared. But even though his name was cleared legally, the emotional damage couldn't be undone so easily. He later said it was one of the most traumatic experiences of his life. "I felt like I was in a hole I couldn't climb out of," he said. "I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't believe what was happening." But Cliff didn't take it all lying down. He fought back by taking the BBC to court in 2018, arguing that they had violated his privacy by broadcasting the raid live. The trial was emotional, and Cliff broke down in tears as he described how he felt humiliated. how his reputation had been ripped apart on national television. And this time, he won. The court ruled in Cliff's favor. The judge said the BBC had acted unlawfully and awarded him damages worth £210,000. It was a huge moment for Cliff and also public figures everywhere. Cliff later said he didn't sue the BBC to punish them. He did it to protect others from going through the same thing. He wanted justice, not just for himself, but for anyone whose name could be ruined by a news crew chasing a headline. Withdrawal from the public eye. After everything Cliff Richard had been through, it's no surprise that something inside him changed. For most of his life, Cliff had been in the spotlight. He was used to it because he had practically grown up in front of the cameras. But after the BBC raid and the years of stress that followed, he began to stylishly step back. Fans started to notice that he wasn't doing the rounds like he used to. There were fewer TV appearances and interviews. Concerts became more selective, and public outings less frequent. It wasn't that he disappeared completely, but it was clear he was choosing peace over pressure. In interviews after the court case, Cliff spoke openly about how much the ordeal had affected him. He described sleepless nights, overwhelming anxiety, and the deep emotional toll of being falsely accused on a global stage. After years of being the go-to gentleman of British pop, he no longer trusted the media in the same way. And who could blame him? The betrayal he felt, especially from an institution like the BBC, cut deep. So he retreated to places that made him feel safe. He spent more time in Portugal and Barbados, far away from paparazzi and press conferences. But Cliff didn't stop creating. He continued to record albums, write books, and occasionally perform. He just did it when he felt like it, without worrying about chart positions or press coverage. He was only focused on doing what made him happy. If that meant releasing a gospel album instead of a pop single, so be it. If it meant performing at a charity concert rather than a major arena, even better. He also leaned more heavily into his faith. It became his anchor during those years of tranquility, while also relying on prayer, meditation, and close friends to help him find a sense of balance that fame never could. Why he disappeared. In several interviews after the BBC raid and the court battles, Cliff finally opened up about why he pulled away from the world he had lived in for so long. "I wasn't just hurt, I was broken," he said in one interview. "I had trusted the system, I had trusted the media, and they both turned on me." For decades, Cliff had kept his private life private, and he did it with grace. But after being accused publicly of something he didn't do, a lot of things changed for him. He said he began to look at everyone differently. He felt like he couldn't trust people. Even simple things like answering the phone or walking into a shop made him anxious. His name had been dragged through the mud for the world to see, and even though he was cleared, the damage had been done. Cliff admitted that he thought about quitting everything. For someone who had spent over 60 years in the public eye, the idea of walking away felt both terrifying and freeing. He started to find peace in silence and in being away from flashing cameras and endless questions. More than anything, he just wanted to live. He spent his days gardening, reading, writing songs without deadlines, and enjoying long walks along the beach. The Cliff Richard that people had seen on stage all those years still existed, but only for the people he chose to share himself with. He still releases music and appears now and then for special performances. But the man who once lived under a magnifying glass has finally learned to live on his own terms. But what if Cliff stepped away, not to protect his peace, but because he was tired of defending himself against the nagging whispers that never stopped? And if the spotlight was more harmful than healing, can we really blame him for leaving it behind? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.